just had this kind of epiphany moment. It's like, this is an awesome responsibility. So, I came here with the idea of doing cool research and building chips and all this stuff. And I said, yeah, I want to do that. I said, but 150 faces staring at me out there. And if I can teach them what they know, I've just amplified what I can do times 150. And I can do that over and over and over again. And I thought it was really cool.
Welcome to Triangle Tweener Talks, a weekly podcast by builders for builders where we explore the startup journey from the idea to the exit and all the lessons in between with an exclusive focus on founders from the Triangle region of North Carolina. Now here's your host, serial founder and general partner of the Triangle Tweener Fund, Scott Wingo.
Welcome to this episode of Triangle Tweener Talks featuring Dr. Tom Miller. This episode is brought to you by our amazing sponsors, Bank of America. Bank of America's transformative technology group helps game-changing tech businesses and founders realize their boldest ambitions across a wide range of technology sectors. With hands-on support, world-class resources, and an extensive network, Bank of America provides the stability and scalability that tech companies need to rapidly grow today and into the future. Whitley Recruiting Partners. Whitley Recruiting Partners specializes in recruiting top tech talent for growth stage startups in the Triangle. We target industry-specific entrepreneurial employees who drive immediate results through a fast, accurate, and scalable recruiting process. There is a special offer for Tweener Time subscribers. You can get a free survey of available local talent for any of your openings. Aligned Technology Group, or ATG. Navigating cloud costs as a startup? ATG helps you maximize AWS Activate credits up to $100,000 in free credits for startups and $300,000 for AI-driven startup businesses. As an AWS Advanced Tier partner, we streamline your cloud journey, optimizing security, scalability, and cost efficiency. Startups move fast. We help you build smarter. Robinson Bradshaw, a full-service business law firm with a passion for supporting the Triangle's startup ecosystem. Learn more about Robinson Bradshaw startups and venture capital practice at robinsonbradshaw.com. Extensis HR, a professional employer organization, or PEO. Extensis HR empowers tech founders and growing businesses to scale smarter. We take HR administration off your plate, managing payroll, recruiting, employee benefits, and retirement plans, compliance, risk, and more, so you can focus on innovation. For over 25 years, we've leveraged a people-first approach, customer-centric mindset, and deep industry expertise to ensure employers have the tools they need to stay competitive in today's market. Last but not least, EisnerAmper, formerly HPG, one of the world's largest business consulting firms with a dedicated technology practice offering outsourcing, accounting, tax, and advisory services. Our experienced professionals serve more than 2,000 technology companies from early-stage startups to public enterprises. Discover how EisnerAmper's stage-specific solutions and industry expertise can help you achieve your milestones, whether startup, international expansion, or M&A, all the way to IPO. Visit eisneramper.com/tech, T-E-C-H, for more details. And a special Tweener Talks extended thanks to our friends at Earfluence for partnering with us to produce this podcast. We've saved this one. It's been in the can, as we say in the business, for quite a while. This is going to kick off kind of our post-Tweener madness season, if you will, because it's pretty special. At the foundation of the Triangle startup ecosystem are our three Tier 1 research universities, NC State, UNC, and Duke. Over the decades, individuals at those universities have championed a focus on entrepreneurship. I remember in the 90s, you would go to the universities and try to talk to someone about entrepreneurship, and it was almost like a little rebellion kind of inside the university where some people were advocating and trying to get the university to do more, but there wasn't a lot of activity. But over those decades, individuals at the universities became the champions to encourage a focus on entrepreneurship and evangelizing it. So, for example, Randy Meyer and Ted Zoller at UNC, Howie and Jamie at Duke, and at NC State, the champion for over 40 years for entrepreneurship was Tom Miller. When I graduated from South Carolina, University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks, my entrepreneurially minded professor there, Dr. Pettis, said, "Hey, Scott," and I had a couple other folks. He said, "Y'all should consider going to NC State for a master's. There's a fellow there by the name of Dr. Tom Miller who is really into helping engineering students think about starting businesses." So he helped set up a meeting, and we came up here to the big city of Raleigh. And after about 30 minutes, Dr. Miller convinced us to come to NC State. He tells the story the opposite way, but trust me, it goes that way. 18 months later, I had a tough choice. So I was wrapping up my master's, and I had three job offers. 2 were from big companies, one from Motorola and one from IBM, and another one was from a startup up in Connecticut. And I went to Dr. Miller, and I said, I'm really torn here. I like the stability of big companies. My father was an entrepreneur, and our life was quite unstable due to that. And he worked insane hours. So I was kind of leaning towards going to big companies, but Dr. Miller said, hey, let's think about this. Do you have a mortgage? And I was like, no, I'm a poor grad student. Do you have any car payments? I said, no, I've got this beater, like 8-year-old, 150,000 mile Honda Accord. But I don't have a car payment. And he basically said, well, you've got nothing to lose. This is actually the lowest risk decision you'll make in your life. As you get older, the risks go up when you get married and have a mortgage and a car payment and kids and school and all that kind of stuff. This is actually the perfect time for you to do that. And that was good logic, and I couldn't fault him. And then he said, if this startup doesn't work out, I've seen this over and over again where people go to startups, and if it doesn't work out, they still get that big company job. So I thought, that's pretty good advice. So I ended up going to that startup, and kind of the rest is history. That got me on my path I've been on for a while. I wasn't alone in this experience with Dr. Miller. Generations of entrepreneurships from the 80s to today were impacted by his passion for entrepreneurship. Folks like that you've seen on here, Richard Holcomb, Chris Evans, Bill Nussey. Sadly, he's in Atlanta, but he's an NC State grad, so we still claim him. Charles Gaddy, who was one of the co-founders of Global Data Consortium with Bill Spruill. Hirsch Tapadia, who we will have here on the show momentarily. Brandon Kashani, Thad and Kevin at Filter Easy. This list could go on for the whole show. And those are the local folks many of you know and love. But the list is actually bigger. As I travel around, I go out to Silicon Valley a lot. Dr. Miller has a kind of a fan club out there as well, and he used to take students out there to Silicon Valley. So some of those names include the likes of Hal Lawton, who runs a lot of big. He ran Home Depot for a while. I know him from my Channel Advisor days, and probably most famously Jeff Williams, who is now the COO of Apple. Yes, Tim Cook's direct report was a mechanical engineer at NC State and was influenced by Dr. Tom Miller. So also, I learned from this podcast, Dr. Miller had his fingers on the founding of Red Hat. So that was interesting. In 1993, Dr. Miller formalized his efforts and started the Engineering Entrepreneurs Program, or the EEP. I was one of the founding sponsors of that, proudly. Then in 2008, he took it from the engineering department campus-wide with the work of some other folks across the campus that were also big in entrepreneurship, with the Entrepreneurship Initiative. Then in 2010, his vision for a startup garage was realized with the launch of the NC State Garage, which expanded in 2019 thanks to a gift from Andy Albright. When Dr. Miller retired from NC State in 2017, myself, Bill Nussey, Chris Evans, Chip Andrews, and a bunch of other folks endowed the Thomas K. Miller III Fellows Endowment. This provides students that have started a startup in one of the many programs there that want to keep going after they graduate with $1,000 a month for 6 months. Dr. Miller used to say, all people need is rent and ramen money, and that's what that's for. So that was one of the highlights of my career, was being there to, we surprised him with that, and that was a lot of fun. And we'll talk about that a little bit in this interview. Unfortunately, one of my mentors I mentioned, Dr. Pettis, is no longer with us. And one regret I have is not being able to interview him and get his story down in a format like this. But listeners and viewers, I'm excited to share that I was able to sit down with Tom. He was gracious enough to come out of retirement and record this interview. So like all the interviews in the series, I learned a ton. I hadn't heard the Red Hat story and a bunch of other things. And he, now that he's gotten some space from NC State, he can talk about a little bit of the politics that went on in there and stuff. So I found that interesting. I think it's pretty touching and an inspirational story. And really what comes out in this interview is Tom's passion for entrepreneurship, engineering, students, and making the Triangle a better place, and NC State. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Where do you want to start?
Yeah, let's start. Are you from North Carolina?
I am from North Carolina. I'm from Eastern North Carolina. Grew up in Kinston. My wife and I both grew up in Kinston, and we like to say it's a great place to be from.
Yeah.
Kind of like Aiken, South Carolina.
Yeah, not a lot of industry or reasons to kind of stay around.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the early days, how did you get interested in technology in general, or even like STEM?
It's funny because I was always kind of interested, but I was never, that was never really a thing. When I went to college, I only applied to one college, and that was the place that my friends from high school were planning to go, and that was Carolina. So I went to Carolina with no clue or no idea why or what. But and it was kind of interesting because I didn't have a major. In fact, I didn't even know what a major was. That's an honest statement, Scott.
Yeah.
And
I didn't, when I was from South Carolina, I didn't know there was more than the 2 schools that were in South Carolina.
Yeah. Well,
it's like, I was like, what? There's all these other schools?
So I sort of discovered technology as an undergraduate at Carolina. I took a computer science course and loved it, did really well in it. And I was going to major in computer science once I figured out what a major was. And my roommate was majoring in computer science, and he talked me out of it. He said there's this thing called, he said that, the first class is great. You learn to program and all this stuff. And then you take these other classes, this thing called assembly language, and it's incredibly hard. And he said, and you'll hate it. And so he talked me out of majoring in computer science. So fast forward to graduate school, when I actually was, programming literally down at the hardware level, interfacing and stuff. I learned all about assembly language, and I loved it. I was like, this is how computers work. I finally now understand how they actually work. I majored, and this is, when I found out, I got a letter from my advisor, whom I never met at Carolina, my junior year, and it said, you have to declare a major or you can't stay. And so I said, I got to find out what our major is. And
so you're just dabbling around, just taking stuff out of the catalog.
Yeah, just taking stuff out of the catalog. And so there was no website that you go to get this. So I found this place called the Registrar's Office, and they had this big catalog booklet of all the majors and all the requirements. And so I got copies of all that stuff. And I literally got a copy of my transcript and started counting courses and comparing them against majors in the booklet. And I liked math. I liked science. So I'd taken a bunch of math courses and chemistry courses and some physics courses and stuff like that. So I actually found out that I could double major in math and chemistry and graduate in 4 years. So I wrote that down, sent it back in to my advisor. Never heard from him again. They let me stay.
They checked their bureaucratic box. They're like, okay, you can stay.
Yeah, so I graduated with a double major in math and chemistry.
Yeah.
And that was 1976.
Got it.
Yeah.
So computer science class, just kind of oriented for modern folks in like 74 or 75 or whenever it was.
Yeah.
This is on a IBM mainframe with cards.
Yeah.
This is cards, or
Cards.
this is switches?
It was cards.
Yeah.
And you had this big box, that you kept your cards in. And I learned the trick from the grad students, and they had these giant boxes, and they would take a magic marker and draw a diagonal down. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, my dad had a VAX in our house.
Yeah.
And before then, he worked at this company, Burroughs, and he would come home with his programs, and he would bring ones that he had dropped and be resorting them, and I would help him sort them. So I know the diagonal trick. Yeah.
Yeah, so I learned that, and I never dropped my box of cards, but I spent many long hours in the computing center, because you would take your cards, you would give them to the guy, back at the window, and then a few minutes later, your printout would come up, right? And then you would look and see what went wrong. That was debugging, right? So what went wrong, and then you go
to trial and error.
More cards. Yeah, it's a long, drawn out process. And it got so, this is crazy, but this is true. You may have never experienced this, but it had, when the first page would print, it had your name on it. And then I actually learned the sound of the clackety clack of the printer when mine came up. And so I could hear the printer and I could tell that it was mine.
Oh, there I am. Yeah. Wow.
And I'd walk up to the window and the guy would hand it to me.
Yeah.
So,
Tom Miller's probably got a very distinct, like the double L is probably is like
yeah,
probably like
yeah.
that's probably your, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when you did assembly, so that was like actually going in and turning the switches on the computer, probably, right? Or like, it was still cards at that point.
And that was in graduate school.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not until graduate school. And, I was playing around with like the 8085 kits and stuff like that. That was when I first learned assembler. And, I saw, and I met your dad once a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you said he had the PDP-11 in the house. Mm-hmm. And in graduate school, I was working, this was in biomedical engineering, and I was working in the UNC hospital and in the pulmonary division. And we had a PDP-11 that we're using, to do data analysis and stuff, like real time.
At that point,
stuff.
we had magnetic tape drives, so you didn't have
magnetic tape drives. Yeah, no punch cards. So that was kind of amazing.
It looked like War Games to give people a modern. So if you see the movie War Games, that's like a good capture of what those computers looked like lots of spinny. The magnetic drives, as a kid, I thought they were fun to just like watch those things spin around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We actually had, the big magnetic disc that you could plug into the computer and stuff. And
and it's funny, like so that was a hard drive, right? And it was, what was it, like 2,000 bytes or something? Like
something like that. It was bigger than a floppy drive.
That's like it's like so funny. We've got like gigs on here.
I know.
Like it used to take like
and so that's funny too. I mean, when I first went to NC State after I graduated from graduate school, they were renovating this room on the 3rd floor and tearing out walls and then beefing up the power supply coming into the room and all the cooling and stuff like that. And they were doing was putting in a couple of hard drives, and they were 500 megabytes each.
Whoa.
Yes.
Huge.
And that was like unheard of.
You had to run power and AC for them.
Had to run power. It was it was probably $1 million installation. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So dollars per megabyte has come down pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you graduate. So then you did a little post-grad. You went and got a master's in biomedical?
Actually, after graduation, I needed to get a job. So I got a job. I found a job as a chemist near my hometown, near Kinston. And it was a little R&D lab for this company that made automotive, like gaskets and stuff like that. And so, I got the job. I think my starting salary was $6,000 and something a year, something crazy like that. Yeah.
Could buy a house back then for
close.
You should have bought all the triangle real estate you could have gotten your hands on.
I was thrilled.
Yeah.
I was thrilled. But I worked there, and it was interesting. I was the head of the lab, and I had a couple of people that worked for me, but I just knew I couldn't do this for 30 years. I just couldn't. This was not me. And so I decided I needed to get more education. And so
You just didn't like the chemistry part? You didn't like working for a big company? What was it?
The company was not, it was kind of a big company, but it was a small lab in Snow Hill, North Carolina. And, it was a lot of repetitive stuff like, compounding these different things to meet specifications and doing testing and all that. And it didn't thrill me.
Intellectually stimulating?
It was not intellectually stimulating. And so, okay, well, if I'm going to do, and then I did get interested in computers then. In fact, I guess the Apple II had come out, and maybe the IBM PC and things. Yeah, I guess they were maybe brand new. And I tried to talk my boss into getting a computer for the lab and let me taking all of the files that we had for all these products and all these compounds and building a database. And he wouldn't spring for the computer. So he said, I'll tell you what, why don't you just build the database on this card file, and then you can flip to the card file. And so I did. I came up with sort of an organizational structure for that I wanted to put on the computer, but I never got the computer. And used it one time because he came into my office and said, hey, there was this thing, this project that we did like 7 years ago for this company. And we were doing, I can't remember the details of it, but he said, can you find the files on it So I flipped through my cards with the information that it gave me, and I found it right away. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I did want to go back and get involved somehow with computing and all that. So I went back to the only school that I knew, which was UNC, went to the registrar's office, and I said, hey, can I get a list of graduate programs? So I got a list of graduate programs and then read through the whole list. And there were two that interested me. And one was computer science, of course. Mm-hmm. The other was this new program, very young program called biomedical engineering. And so I went and visited with both programs. And the biomedical engineering program was, again, it was very young. They spent a lot of time with me, talked to me, got me very excited about the stuff that they were doing and the idea of, chips and, putting chips in the brain and all this kind of stuff.
Was it in concert with NC State at that point, or was it
not?
It was.
It was not. It was all UNC. There were about, I think, 5 faculty members total.
Wow. Yeah.
And
was it the only one in the country at that point? It had to be like crazy.
No, there were maybe a couple more.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the professors were like mostly electrical engineer PhDs from like MIT or Carnegie Mellon, places like that. And so that was great. And it was a wonderful experience too, because it's a very small program. I got to know all of the faculty and all the other graduate students. It was a very, very close-knit group.
What's the history of that? Was there who at UNC got a bug up there, to like say, we need biomedical engineering?
A guy named Art Coulter. He was the founding professor, and he was a really interesting guy. And he was, I think, he was an MD, PhD. And so he got the idea of combining this engineering knowledge, this kind of systems knowledge with, the biological system, which is actually, at first you think, it doesn't make sense, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
Systems. Yeah.
It's
industrial engineering, human blood flow, like there's systems are systems.
Yeah.
Inputs and outputs.
And so, actually, the group that I worked in was in the pulmonary division, and I worked on respiratory mechanics, and it was super interesting. I went with the intention to get a master's degree, and so I had, I got this assistantship, so I had full support, full ride, and all that.
Nice.
And that's where I got, sort of involved in the programming of the PDP-11 and things like that, because the whole thing, and this is what my master's thesis was about, and that's modeling the lungs and the respiratory system, from the trachea, all that as an RLC circuit, resistance, inductance, capacitance. And it turns out to be a really good model. And you can look at it as sort of a bunch of RLC circuits in parallel.
So you modeled that on a PDP-11.
We modeled that on a PDP-11.
I can't even imagine how hard
No.
do.
It was great.
I'm like in awe of it, like just like a...
We did physical experiments, Scott. We had this I don't know how much time we got, but this could take a while.
This is where there's all these people that don't think like, that you could do Apollo and stuff with the computers you had back then. You could do all this stuff, but it was just like the pure math. There wasn't like a user interface. You didn't have all the fancy dressing. Someone had to it was the pure math, and you had to be the fancy dressing. Yeah.
And you programmed at a fairly low level.
Yeah.
And this was Fortran that we ran on the PDP-11, because that's what everybody in engineering did, was Fortran.
Yeah.
Back then.
It's better than COBOL.
Yeah, that or COBOL. And so again, we were doing this in the lab, and we had this big rack of equipment. This guy named Jim Fulton. He was an electrical engineer, and he worked in this lab, and he built literally this giant rack of equipment that would generate low frequency random noise. And we would put a mouthpiece on the person, or we did experiments with dogs and other stuff, and you would breathe, and it would just be doing these little puffs of white noise. It was actually, I think, pink noise instead of white noise. And so we would capture the pressure and flow, pull that in and store it on the disk in the PDP-11, and then run Fourier transforms on it and do all this post-processing stuff. And And so, yeah, that was, I want to get into all the details, but basically building sort of a spectral analysis of that. And what you could tell is, okay, well, you know what? And your lung, instead of what's going on with you, is you've got a small area of your lung that maybe has higher resistance or higher capacitance, which means the alveoli are not expanding like they're supposed to. It was super, super interesting. But,
It's amazing you could do that back then. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to do it, I was building hardware. I was building boards and putting them in this. It was a PDP-11 Mink, if you ever heard of that. It was a smaller one that you used in the lab. And we had the one like your dad had as well. That was one of the coolest projects I ever did, was transferring data from the Mink to that computer. I actually transferred the operating system. And I did that by building all of the hardware and using an analog recorder that we had in the lab to build a digital tape that I could take, and all the code I could transfer from one to the other because it is compatible. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So that's where I learned everything. And I did a lot of the PDP-11 assembler too, because I couldn't do everything I needed to do with Fortran. So PDP-11 and assembler. And so that's how I got started. And then one day a thing happened kind of randomly that kind of led me to my career at NC State. And that was one of my fellow graduate students. We all shared an office together, and he walked in one day with this flyer. He said, "Hey, I found this flyer on campus." He said, "There's a guy over in computer science that is going to teach a course in chip design, and they're going to actually build chips." And so that we both thought that sounded interesting. So we walked over and knocked on his door. A guy named Henry Fuchs. He's quite a famous professor from Chapel Hill. Was into computer graphics. He actually built this thing called Pixel Planes and Pixel Flow. You may have heard of that.
Yep.
Anyhow, so John Isles, my fellow graduate student, and I, we walked in the office, and he was sitting there with this older guy with this kind of cowboy tie on. And
a lot of engineers back then wear the weird little stringy cowboy tie.
This was even a more famous guy. It was Fred Brooks, who was
Fred Myth.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And so I was no idea
say
who he was.
The only person I know that is famous is Fred Brooks. Yeah.
Yeah. So we sat down and had a conversation and asked Henry. He said, I said, what are the prerequisites? What do we need to know to take this class? He said, "I don't know." He said, "I've never done it before." He said, and so he asks what we're doing. We're telling him about biomedical engineering and all that. And he said, "You guys actually do hardware?" Yeah, we do hardware, we do software, we do all of it. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You guys should come into the class." And so we did. And interesting, talking to Fred Brooks, he was saying, we've got a VAX computer over here, and it runs Unix. So what in the world is Unix?
Ooh, a VAX is like big iron. Yeah.
Yeah.
The PDP-11's big.
Yeah.
Daddy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Unix is very, I don't think that was standard DEC. They had to probably hack it. That's probably they probably had to root.
Unix ran on, this was Berkeley Unix, and, they did run on VAXs. I mean, it was kind of the thing.
I don't know if that was
there's only a handful of them around the country.
I don't know if DEC liked it or not, but I'm sure.
No.
Yeah. That was probably not standard.
DEC didn't like it.
I'm sure it violated the warranty.
Which was part of their ultimate downfall, in my opinion. So anyway, they said, we're going to be using Unix. Well, okay, we can learn it. And a language called C. And I said, "What's C?" And Fred Brooks said, "Well, it's this language where you can get as close to the machine as you want or stay as far from the machine as you want," which I thought was the greatest description of C ever. Mm-hmm. And so took the class. I started learning Unix and C, and I said, "Where has this been all my life?" Because with pipes and Unix, you could put things together and do things that you just really couldn't do.
Yeah, much better
on other systems. And then
if you've done assembly, C is like a godsend.
It's like okay, yeah. I've been having to interface Fortran and assembly language. That's a big pain in the butt. And here I've got this language that does it all. It just does it all right there. And so I thought that was the greatest thing ever. And so John and I, we were the only guys in the class that knew anything about hardware at all. I mean, there's a bunch of computer science guys in the class.
Because you've been building it for the project you're working on.
So that was an interesting thing. John and I went and talked, and we said, hey, that big rack of equipment that generates the random noise that we use in the lab, what if we could reduce that and build a chip that does that? And so we had the idea, and actually it was John's idea. He came up with the idea of this, and we divided it into two chips, and one would generate the amplitude, and then the other would generate the frequency. And then we put them together and, put a filter on them, and we built this thing.
Now, designing chips today, you use this, there's all these tools for doing it. Mm-hmm. Back then, so I imagine it was still etched on silicon, right?
We had a tool called VI.
Okay. All right. So,
no, there was the
VI code editor or a different VI?
No, we just used a regular text editor, which I used VI back then.
Okay, so so there's some text file that would do the chip.
It's called CIF, Caltech Intermediate Format, and you would just basically you would lay out rectangles, and you would type in the coordinates of the rectangles, and then you'd lay them out. And actually, I came up with, because our chip was kind of complicated and big, and in fact, Henry told us we couldn't do it. Because we said, why? He said, because it's the first time we're doing this class, and we're going to send these chips off to get them fabricated. And he says, what you guys want to do, it looks great, but it has no chance of actually working because it's too big and too complicated. And so we went back and said, okay, here's the deal. If you'll let us do these and submit them, we will do a smaller subset that, a tiny piece of this chip that will do something useful, and it will be almost guaranteed to work. And so we ended up doing that. We built the little chip, and I guess it got fabricated, but the big chips came back.
Yeah.
And they actually worked.
Oh, cool. What was the idea? Like, where was this going to be fabbed? Was there was a fab here for a while, that MCNC thing, or this predates all that?
I think this was ARPA.
Okay.
Yeah, they had a program. It started at Berkeley, and this was they were actually trying to get universities to get engineering students, computer science students actually building chips. And so you made your CIF file and you sent it off, and they fabricated it and they sent you the chips back. Mm-hmm. And
in the US too. Yeah, this is before it all had left. We actually can make stuff.
Yeah. And so that was kind of amazing, and an amazing experience.
Yeah. Do you know the story of how Fred Brooks got to the Triangle?
Fred is an Eastern North Carolina native as well.
Because in my mind, he's more of like an MIT, Carnegie Mellon person.
Well, he did, and I don't know. He did, and was it MIT or Carnegie Mellon? He did his PhD there, and he actually started the computer science program at Chapel Hill. Huh. It was the first PhD grant in computer science program in the country, and but he was from Eastern North Carolina.
Okay, wow, I didn't realize that. So Eastern North Carolina. So Fred, and he was like a generation older than you, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. So he or like 25 years. So he was from Eastern North Carolina. Went to, I guess, Carnegie Mellon, or I can actually look this up.
Yeah, I don't.
Harvard.
remember.
He's a Harvard guy.
Harvard.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
PhD in comp sci from Harvard. So he went to Harvard, and then he came back and founded the UNC.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I always knew he was like a very important part of it.
Yeah.
And he wrote this famous book that everyone reads. But
and he was, he's famous for his book, The Mythical Man Month, which is a really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of eases you into understanding parallel programming. Mm-hmm. Like, and it has my favorite quote, which is super not politically correct today, I guess. But like, 9 women can't make a baby in a month.
Yeah, that's
that one. Like really, that really helps people kind of understand that certain problems can and can't be parallelized. Yeah. Which makes sense, because if you really get into parallel programming, graphics is where. Because every pixel can be its own little program at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Which has led us to GPUs and AI and all that jazz.
That's where Henry was going with all this. Yeah, and John, the guy that I worked with, he ended up staying at Chapel Hill and working in Henry's group, I think until he retired. the Pixel Planes group. And they actually tried to recruit me back after.
This is like 1980 something, right? So this is like early 80s. The people in the triangle poking around on pretty interesting stuff that is still relevant today, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. So Henry, he was thrilled that we built these things and they actually worked. And it was really cool because we replaced our big rack of equipment in the lab with these things.
Oh, wow.
And RTI, they were interested in this work and they got some of the chips. I mean, these chips became a thing. Mm-hmm. And so Henry he brought us back when he made
a case study. Yes.
He got us to come back he was getting this big NSF grant and they were doing a site visit and stuff. And so he asked us to come talk about what we're doing and all this. And so, I think we had a good impact, but that was the thing that got me excited. And that experience, building that chip and all that.
It was cool. You had a real world use for it because I imagine, it's someone like in a first time chip thing, you're like, oh, I'll just do one that'll do some fun math, like a Fourier transform or something. Like, I'm sure like most of them were like
simpler than that.
Even simpler than that. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of them were like super simple.
Like a stoplight controller.
Yeah. Something like super simple. And you guys are like, well, it was actually this, Seattle had a really interesting practical use, which is neat.
Yeah. Yeah. I still have those chips somewhere in my office.
You have to send me a picture and we'll put it in the show notes.
I'll try to find it.
Are these they're probably pretty big, I'd imagine.
Yay big. I mean, the chip itself is about like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So,
you have to, you can sort of see with a big magnifying glass some of the.
Yeah. This is the 80, 86 era of chips.
Yeah.
I think.
80. No. 8086 was later than that. Later. It was 8085.
80. Okay.
8080.
All right.
More like the 8080. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so anyway, that having that, experience in my pocket was, I think, what got me the job at NC State.
Yeah. So then you went for a master's, you stayed for a PhD.
Yeah.
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 And then you decided you wanted to get how did you graduated with your PhD? I imagine your thesis was around this chip thing or?
No, the thesis was not around the chip. The thesis was more, supported by the pulmonary division. So it was more stuff with like respiratory mechanics and stuff, a totally different thing. It was modeling this thing called the forced expiration, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's you breathe in as deep as you can and you breathe out as hard as you can. And, people, that's the way they measure chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and stuff like that. But similar kind of circuit model to look at that and figure out, more detailed information about the disease progression and all that. So that's what I did. So it was, more complex processing, more complex algorithms and all that. But yeah, that was what I did for my PhD. And
so that's winding down. Did you say, I'm going to go back to the factory back home or like what?
Oh, I'm never going to the
I knew you wouldn't. Like what did you say? Nowhere in here, it seems like, have you been a teacher? So, at some point, like
nowhere, Well, actually, I was a little bit of a teacher at one point because they had me teaching respiratory mechanics to the first year med students at one point. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, that was my only teaching experience.
Cool. So then how did you end up at NC State?
So yeah, it turns out my thesis professor, my thesis advisor was an adjunct faculty member at NC State. And he's the one who convinced me to apply. He said, they're trying to get this computer engineering program off the ground. They're just getting started with it. And said, I think that you would be a good asset and you would really have a chance of getting a position there. So, and I hadn't, really not thought about a university job or teaching job or anything like that. And so I actually applied for a couple of jobs, one at RTI doing biomedical engineering type stuff. And this one at NC State, which had nothing to do with biomedical engineering because they didn't have any of that at the time. That was all at UNC.
Yeah.
And so I applied for the job. I talked all about the chip design experience and, showed my chip and the circuits and all the, things that I did and some of the software that I wrote actually to make it easier to to do some of the more complex stuff we needed to do to generate the CIF file because you couldn't just type all that stuff in. So anyway, I ended up, getting an offer there, and I got an offer at RTI as well. But I thought the NC State thing was just a little more exciting. I had no idea what I was getting into. Mm-hmm. But I accepted
just to be a professor, or like
professor. At first, it was like first they offered me a non-tenure track position, and then my advisor said, "Don't take it." Mm-hmm. And so I went back and I said, "Yeah, I think I need a tenure track position if I'm going to go the university route." And so they came back with a tenure track offer.
Yeah.
And
this is 1982.
1982, yeah.
So NC State, 1982, no Centennial campus. Engineering's pretty small.
Yeah.
Relative to today.
It's
largely in like Daniels and a couple of those there's largely just in that one building, or
3 or 4.
There's the nuclear building.
The nuclear building. There was a big, trying to remember the name of the mechanical engineering building. There was Poe Hall, which, not Poe Hall, no, Page Hall, which is where the dean's office was. And industrial engineering, I think, was also there. Engineering was not as big as ag.
4 buildings. 4 buildings, kind of like on what we would call the OG campus.
Yeah. So, again, this was kind of serendipity because it was not a life plan or anything like that to take a job there. But I got into it, and they assigned me a course, which was a required junior level course in digital systems and microprocessors, which was like one of the first core courses in the computer engineering curriculum. Mm-hmm. And again, required courses, a lot of times the students don't want to be there. and they're large classes. I had about 150 students. And this is the first day I ever taught class.
Yeah.
And I walked into the class the very first day, and I looked out, and there were 150 faces staring at me. And, it was before technology, so everybody had pens and paper, notebooks and stuff. So they're ready to take notes. They didn't know anything about me or who I was and all this stuff. So the new guy. And I just had this kind of epiphany moment. It's like, this is an awesome responsibility. So, I came here with the idea of doing cool research and building chips and all this stuff. And I said, yeah, I want to do that. I said, but I thought about, okay, this is the engineering thought. There's 150 faces staring at me out there. And if I can teach them what they know, I've just amplified what I can do times 150. And I can do that over and over and over again. And I thought it's really cool. And so
there's compounding, because you were, spoiler alert, you were at NC State over 40 years. So take that 150, and then you don't just multiply it by 40. You those folks went on to do other stuff, and some of them, have done things. And so it's like a geometrical progression.
It really is. Yeah. And when you're a tenure track faculty member, especially in a, high intensity field like engineering, it's publish or perish, right?
Yeah.
And so
teaching is kind of like a sidebar
it's kind of like a sidebar, but it was then. I think it's a little more taken seriously now than it was then, to be honest. But yeah, NC State was trying to become like a big, national player in the research scene.
Yeah.
Which they certainly did, many times over.
Yeah, and also at this point in time, it was super frustrating from the student side because comp sci wasn't in engineering; it was over in the math department.
Yeah.
And I never did comp sci, both at South Carolina and at NC State, because you look at the catalog and you have to take so much math, and it starts to get into a bunch of math I didn't really care about, like super esoterical stuff.
Yeah,
and I just wanted more computer stuff. So the only way to do that was over on the engineering side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But then at least at South Carolina, to get into engineering, I had to take like, I had to take a bunch of engineering junk I didn't really want to take. So they fixed all that now, which is nice.
And it's funny because back then, and you're absolutely right. They were in 2 different colleges, literally. Mm-hmm. And so computer engineering, I think the computer science guys were like, what is this computer engineering stuff?
They're kind of competitive for kids, and they didn't really agree. One was theoretical, and the other one was like, we don't really touch we don't like build chips.
And it's like, I had a computer science department head tell me, you're teaching students C programming? Said that will ruin them. They'll And went, no, actually not. I mean, because if you need to get down close to the hardware, which computer engineers do, right? You need to know that stuff.
Yeah.
It's not all abstract, right?
Yeah.
And so, there was some tension back then, and it's all gone now. Of course, computer science is part of engineering, and they're very tightly tied.
Yeah, that's where it always should.
But it was not easy back in those days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and so that epiphany, that first day of class, I mean, it kind of set the stage for a lot of my career, because I remembered back to my undergraduate days at Carolina and never hearing from my advisor until I got a letter that said, you've got to declare a major or you can't stay. And I didn't really know, any of the faculty that well. And so I said, I'm going to be different. So I told my students, I said, you know what? These are my office hours. I'm guaranteed to be there then. I said, but you don't need to make an appointment. You come by, and I said, and if you can't come by during my office hours, come by anytime you want, knock on the door, and you can talk to me about anything you want to talk about. And not just what's going to be on the next test, or, what they missed on the homework and blah, 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 and why I should regrade this because they need more points and stuff like that. Anything you want to talk about. And this is entry point for Tom's entrepreneurship career, part one.
Yeah.
And so a couple of those students that came by my office and knocked on the door to talk about anything that they wanted to talk about were Bill Nussey and Chris Evans.
Yeah.
And
now, were you interested in entrepreneurship at this point, or?
I really was not. And, I was kind of focused on
But you're into supporting students. So
I'm into supporting students, but I'm into this is a very challenging career. When you're an assistant professor, it is brutal. It is brutal.
Because you get your class load, and then you're publishing or perishing. It's hard to publish stuff because it's like such a crowded space. And then it's hard to find something you need.
There's this little club called the senior faculty in your department who judge you and decide after 4 years if you stay or go.
Mm-hmm.
And after 6 years, if you get tenure or not. And if you don't get tenure, you go as well. And kind of the default is to go unless they accept you. So it's kind of like, most jobs you get, and the default is that you stay there unless you get fired. And this is the default is you go unless they think you're great and want to keep you. So anyway, so I'm
and kind of working against you is the fact you're, it's probably not going to help you. You're spending so much time with the kids either.
It didn't. It didn't.
Yeah, in that regard. I think today that's changed, but back in that time,
I mean, I was an oddball.
It's the right thing to do, but it's like, it added extra work.
And I wanted to do it. I mean, I said, this is, and if I don't get tenure, I don't get tenure, but I'm gonna pay attention to these kids, and I'm going to talk to them about whatever they want to talk about.
Yeah.
So Bill and Chris, talked about they didn't really want to. They were there for computer engineering. They wanted to learn. They wanted to be the next Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. They didn't want to get a degree and then do a career and all that, go to IBM and work for 30 years and get a gold watch and retire. They wanted to build something. And so they'd come by and we talk a lot about what they wanted to build and things that they wanted to do and all this stuff. And then they walked in one day, and they had this idea, and it was the idea for DaVinci, and said, we've been doing some contract work. I don't know, did Chris tell you all about this?
Yep.
The music system with the IBM PCs and all, which I thought was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, they built this token ring, and they can network these IBM PCs together.
Yeah.
But nobody cares if they can play a symphony, right?
Yeah.
What can you do useful with that? And send messages. And so DaVinci was really, I think, the original email for those kind of machines. I mean, of course, we had it in the Unix systems and all that, but that was cool. And so I lived through the whole journey with them on that, and saw the excitement that they had. With
their office was right over on Hillsborough, so you could just cross the street and go and say, hey, if you want to. Or
and so that was the thing that got me thinking, you know what? these guys, they did it. And they kind of did it against all odds or what they would be hearing from their faculty at the university, their advisors at the university. It's like, okay, come to the job fair and meet with IBM, meet with Nortel and all these others that were, the big employers of the computer engineers at the time and get a job. And yeah, you could get a job easily.
Yeah.
Easily. But that's not what they wanted to do. And I thought, you know what? There's probably a lot of students that would probably go that route if they even knew it was possible. There's the kind of thing that's perception is reality. And if all the people that are teaching you and above you and all that are telling you one thing about how this works as a career, you believe that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I guess it was your co-founder with the Tweener Fund.
Oh, Robbie Allen?
Yeah. He was talking about, he says, you know what? You don't have to have a particular DNA to be an entrepreneur. So I do think it helps. I do think it helps to have that kind of adventurous spirit. But the thing is, there's so many people out there that I've met that until, you really sit down with them and talk to them and they meet other entrepreneurs that say, you know what, I can do this too.
Yeah, the rules that exist were put in place by other people, and you can make your own rules. You may not have to follow those.
Yeah,
the rule of you have to get out of school and go to IBM or a big company that's not a rule.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, some faculty thought it was. I had when I started doing this, and I had a senior faculty member come to me, and one of the ones that would be in this closed room judging whether I could stay or go. He said, "How dare you tell these students that they can get an engineering degree and go off and start their own company? That's just," he said, "that has no place in the College of Engineering, much less, or the university, much less the College of Engineering." And I'm like, you know what? I might be ruining my career here. But I said, I still believe it's the right thing to do because I've been working with these students. And you know what?
Yeah.
I'm seeing they're passionate about what they do. And they're being successful.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
Yeah. So they did DaVinci in, 85. Mm-hmm. And then Chris left in 92, but I think a couple of years later they were acquired. So that was, so you got to see that whole adventure. Were there.
Yeah.
And before you kind of like formalize this, were there other, those are two good anchors. Were there other, and I know Richard was kind of.
Well, around. Richard, I mean, he kind of predated me. And so, I didn't get to know Richard until the 1993-ish.
Okay.
Or about that time, I think.
All right.
But
how about Dr. Goodnight? Did you get involved with him at all?
No.
Okay.
I've
he predated you a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I've met him a few times, but no, I don't really know him well.
There was a couple other things.
He plays golf.
Yeah. Yeah. He has a golf course. Yeah. Handily, he has a golf course. What other entrepreneurs were like kind of bopping around back then that you remember?
David Gardner.
Yeah, Dave Gardner.
David Gardner. I bought my second PC from David Gardner. I bought my first one from.
Was it like hustling him out of his dorm room or something?
No, he wasn't. He actually had a shop in I think it was Waverly Place back then. And
was he a student of yours?
He was not actually a student of mine, but I knew him from his student days. And so, I've been, pretty close to David all these years and stuff. Bill Wyke, I think Bill was a student of mine, and Bill, I think, started that computer shop, this clone shop, with David way back then. I bought my first PC from Michael Dell when he was hustling out of his dorm room. I talked to him on the phone.
Oh, the mail? Yeah.
Another one that comes to mind is Brian Harry. I don't know if you know Brian.
I know Brian well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course you know Brian. And so Brian started One Tree Software, but
I got to get him on the podcast.
You should.
You're gonna have to help me on that one.
Yeah,
he's kind of shy. We're gonna pry him out and get him on.
He's retired now. He just retired from Microsoft.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
What an amazing career.
Yeah. When I met him, he had started. So it had like a tree in the name, like One Tree. One Tree.
Yeah.
And it was like what became Visual. Visual. Basically like super early.
Visual Source Safe.
Visual Source Safe. Yeah.
And so, yeah, Brian was my student, and spent a lot of time with Brian. He may be the smartest person I know. Unbelievably brilliant. I taught him C programming, and like after I taught him C programming, in 2 weeks he was running circles around me doing stuff that, I mean, he was absolutely amazing. I visited him one time, was out at Microsoft and went to his office, and he's doing big stuff. He was kind of the guy behind the .NET runtime. And
he was like a divisional president. He's like a pretty big wig out there.
Yes, a big wig and a technical fellow, which is like the highest honor in Microsoft and stuff. But yeah, it was funny where he's in his office and he's over there, and he had a machine up, and he says, he's the C compiler, it's terrible. And he's down there tweaking Microsoft code at the assembly language level.
Yeah.
It's just wild. And he's this vice president guy.
Yeah.
So, but anyhow, so Brian, yeah, I connected Brian with Bill and Chris when they were doing DaVinci, because they called me up and they needed, some people with software skills. And so Brian, that's where he did his own source code management system, which was OneTree.
Yeah, Chris mentioned that in his pod.
Yeah. And so, of course, I followed Brian's career, but there were others, a number of others. But then this was, all this happened over the course of my first few years there in the 80s, and then an opportunity came along with NC State was involved in this consortium with the National Science Foundation to, what was it called? Succeed, Southern University and College Coalition for Engineering Education. And it was a big multi-university kind of grant, but the goal was, in essence, to rewrite the book on engineering education for the 21st century. And so I had the idea to, okay, you know what? This entrepreneurship thing really needs to be part of the engineering curriculum. Students need to be exposed to this. I mean, not everybody's going to do it, but if you don't know you can do it, you're probably not going to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so I and a couple other guys.
This is a little bit of you getting out on a ledge. Like
getting out.
You already know your colleagues are like not super spun up.
Not super supportive.
Yeah. So now you're going to go propose like all of engineering embraces this. So I'm sure there could be some pushback that coming your way.
There was, but actually not as much as you might think at that point, because this was a big NSF program, and NC State was committed to it. This whole thing, we called it Curriculum 21 was the tagline. And
projecting into 2021?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, no, sorry, 21st century.
Okay.
21st century.
Okay.
So this was the 1990s.
Yeah. Okay.
It was about 1990. And so I got involved in it, and I wrote a proposal for, there were three of us actually that wrote a proposal around this idea of entrepreneurship, the Engineering Entrepreneurs Program. And lo and behold, it got funded. It got 3 years of funding. And that actually was a good thing, because when you get NSF funding for a project, and especially a university where you're trying to get more and more NSF funding, that gives you some legitimacy to pursue this. And so when I was doing it kind of on my own, in my spare time, not legitimate, all of a sudden became legitimate.
Yeah.
And so got the funding for that, actually launched the program in 1993. And I thought, well, this will last for 3 years, as long as we have the funding from NSF. And then, it's probably not going to catch on, because there really wasn't that much support. I mean, it was like, okay, you got this NSF grant, go do it, write some papers and get some publications and all that stuff, which
sometimes these grants kind of chain though. They're like, go experiment. And then, sometimes they can kind of like daisy chain into other stuff.
Well, I mean, it ended up turning out to be a really good thing. And so there've been, I don't even know how many, but thousands of students who've been through it now. And there've been, a good number of students who have come out of there and have been successful in entrepreneurial careers that, tell me that without that program, they would never have known that this was a possibility, or even where to start, or how to start, or make the connections, like the people like you, that I've connected many students to, and Richard and others, Bill and Chris, I mean, over the years.
Yeah.
And, I kind of became a connector person from, getting to know all these people over the years. And that kind of became mostly, through the late 90s and the 2000s when I went over to the dark side and became a university administrator. That connector role was a big thing for me.
Yeah. And what was different about, like, what did the EEP add? Like, what were some of the things tactically that it did?
The first challenge was finding a way to fit it into the curriculum because the curriculum was jam-packed full. As you've got an engineering degree, that there weren't even any free electives. There are now because they're mandated, but there weren't any free electives then. The University Board of Governors had then said you can't, because the engineering curriculum had become bloated. It's like, I don't know, 135, 140 hours to the curriculum. And they said, okay, you've got to cut it down to 128 hours. So the way you do that is you cut out all free electives. And so there was really no room. But I had the idea, okay, what if we made this a track in the senior design program, which is a requirement of all the engineering students. So they do the senior design project, and so yeah, that's a place for it to fit. And so the way that it differed from senior design was the traditional senior design, you've got companies that will come in and they'll sponsor a team and they'll give you some kind of set of requirements, some project to do, some research to do, whatever, and you do it and you report on it and you're done with your senior design. And typically you might go to work for that company or, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say that's a bad learning experience, but it's not a learning experience conducive to becoming an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And so the way that we did it was to start with a clean sheet of paper. Okay, nobody's going to tell you, this is your assignment, go do this research and, write this little piece of software, build this little piece of hardware, anything like that. You've got to come up with, using your engineering knowledge and experience and what you've seen out there, a problem that you think you can solve that needs to be solved, and then go out and talk to people, which engineers often don't like to do, talk to people and figure out, okay, would anybody actually buy this? And not yourself, don't build it because you'd buy it. You want it yourself because
you can't be your mom and dad.
You can't be your mom and dad, And so you do that, and then you look at how much it's going to cost to build it, how much you could sell it for, and you actually, to satisfy the senior design, they actually built a prototype of the thing that they wanted to do. And there were real companies came out of that, a number of them actually, and sometimes out of the project that they did, sometimes not. I mean, you probably, I'm sure you remember. When Undercover Colors, remember those guys?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So that was their project in the EEP. And then, they raised money, they got and were on a pretty good success trajectory. And then, things happened and it fizzled out. But those guys, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. Tyler Maloney, he's out in Silicon Valley now. He's doing other companies and having great time, great success and all that. But yeah, so
I think this is a good example because you're an entrepreneur inside the belly of the big, any big organization, not picking on NC State, but it's hard to navigate that as an entrepreneur. You've got all these roadblocks. But having watched you watch from the outside, you're really good at kind of adapting it into the program. So you were like, all right, you found this little wedge where you could do the senior design. Yeah. No one could argue against that. Right. So now you've got a wedge.
Right.
And then, later on you were able to do, kind of add a bunch more stuff. So what happened next in that?
Well, I mean, the program, it started out, I mean, I was in electrical and computer engineering. And so we started out in sort of a small class of students from that department. One of my colleagues who started this with me was from mechanical engineering. So, they bought in. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to buy in. The departments didn't have to buy in, but electrical and mechanical bought in right away. And then over the years, we got more and more buy-in from different departments. So we never had nuclear. I don't think we ever had civil. I mean, they're just kind of different. Computer science was difficult to bring in, but we ended up. They have they don't let students do the engineering entrepreneurs program for senior design. What we worked out though was that we made it a technical elective for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was a way to bring the computer science students in. And yeah, so, and a great thing, Scott, if you go out into the real world, it's not, everybody on a team is not an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
Everybody's not a computer scientist.
Mm-hmm.
You have these people with different backgrounds. And so we started these multidisciplinary teams, which is kind of a novel concept back then. And so,
wait, you're crossing departments?
Yeah, crossing departments.
Why are we helping them? Yeah.
And then, it's like, okay, let's cross colleges a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so the obvious one to bring in was the business school, right? Because those guys, knew some things that our engineering students didn't do. But, one of the things, and this was a thing with me, very important to me, I did not want the engineering students who were leading these teams in the EEP, coming up with the ideas and all, to fall back into the traditional engineering role. In other words, I just want to do the technology and let somebody else figure out who to sell it to and all that stuff. So that was unacceptable. And so, but there was still a good role for the business students and that had knowledge about, some of the things that you have to do to start a business.
They can do sales. We'll let them do sales.
Yeah. And how you do some of the research, the market research and all that stuff. I mean, they were very helpful in that. It was a little bit tense with the business school for a while because as I progressed from the EEP and in, I think it was 2010, I got asked to lead the university-wide entrepreneurship initiative. And that kind of pissed off some of the guys in the business school. And, but
so the other thing you're good as a entrepreneur is you're good at understanding, again, how to work the system. So what, again, I'm watching this from the outside, whatever the leadership was, you would use, they would always be looking for, hey, what's something interesting going on we can put in front of the, this, make part of a marketing campaign or put in front of the board of regents or, we need to go, I, the chancellor, need to go ask for more money. Who has interesting ideas? And you were always like right there ready to say, well, look at this really interesting thing. So you've done a very good, you're and I know you went and founded your own company. We'll talk about that, but you're really good at kind of taking all this entrepreneurship and then like steering this giant battleship the way you want.
Yeah. And you know what? Some people tried to make me, or convince me to give it up, to quit it, to stop doing it.
Yeah.
And I just didn't. Because I didn't want to. And I said, you know what? This is the right thing to do. It's making a difference. I don't care. And an important life lesson I learned, Scott, and this maybe life lesson or navigating a very large bureaucratic university kind of lesson. Don't worry about the naysayers. Don't waste any time trying to convince the naysayers that what you're doing is good and important. Yeah. Focus on the people who get it and the believers, and then, bringing them in, empowering them, creating synergy with them. And the naysayers, some of them, they just go away over time.
Yeah.
You really can't convince them.
You're such a normally calm, steady person, and then you get like super fired up. Like where does that come from? Like what like I understand why you're fired up, but like also you work harder than most people I know. Like where is that, just like being from Eastern North Carolina, or like where does that work ethic and like that getting super fired up come from?
I worked hard in Eastern North Carolina. I mean, I always, had chores. I always had summer jobs, and they were physical jobs like cropping tobacco or, delivering ice all across Eastern North Carolina, filling up the bags, filling up the trucks and driving around, and I worked for a moving company for several years. And so I got really fit.
Yeah.
I wish I still was, but no.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I don't know, Scott. I things that I think are important, I just get passionate about, excited about. And
it's a good thing. I think it's a feature, but yeah. Cool.
So,
well, one of those things that let's kind of take a little sidebar. So somewhere in here, you met a guy named Marshall Brain.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about Marshall Brain.
So Marshall is the greatest guy ever. So I met Marshall when I was at NC State, and this is another. This part of the story will weave into the starting first company, but I won't get to that part.
All right.
Yeah. But so we were doing this system, which you mentioned in your podcast, and I think I heard you mention another one. The computer system, the EOS system.
EOS,
that we had.
yes.
Talking about going out on a limb,
Mm-hmm.
that was really, really, really out on a limb.
Yes, let's set it up. So you had to run all these computer labs, right? Because our kids didn't have their own computers. Even today, there's computer labs. And then the problem is back then it wasn't, we didn't have cloud. And barely had networking. So how do you get, any student across the campus to be able to log into any computer? Today, trivial problem. Back then, non-trivial. And then also have their workspace the same on any computer.
Yeah, exactly. So this was, before that, I had built a computer lab in the EC department, the first one in the EC department, actually. And it was just more of a, generic computer lab kind of thing with floppy disk networking and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then this guy, my friend and colleague at NC State, Billy Willis.
I remember.
You remember Billy?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Billy and I really hit it off. And it was over. He was a PDP-11 expert too. And so, he came and he tried to tell me something I was doing wrong on the PDP-11, and I corrected him. And we were friends ever since. It's hard to imagine. You kind of got to know him, but he's got quite a personality. I mean, the dean once told me, he says, "Yeah, Billy doesn't suffer fools gladly." And so super, super smart guy. And he was actually working in the dean's office and sort of running computing for the dean's office when Larry Monteith was dean. And I was the chairman of the engineering computer committee. And so we got to know each other. We worked together a lot then. And we just kind of got this idea that, there was this big thing that was going on at MIT and Carnegie Mellon, the MIT Athena project, and it was called the Andrew Project at Carnegie Mellon. They kind of melded together. Mm-hmm. And it was really, I wouldn't even call it cutting edge, it was bleeding edge kind of stuff, because it worked sometimes and it didn't work sometimes. And it was all, where X Windows came from, and the whole idea of what we now call cloud computing, and we don't think twice about, but it was very novel back then. And so we ended up working on this idea to implement this whole environment across the College of Engineering at NC State.
Did you guys home grow it, or was it just like an open, you pulled in some of the parts of that thing?
Oh, we pulled in parts of it. We spent a lot of time with the guys.
That's my memory. I remember when you logged in, it would say, this is derived from or something.
From the MIT. Yeah. We named it EOS, which keeping with the Greek mythology kind of theme. Mm-hmm. So EOS was the goddess of the dawn, the Greek goddess of the dawn. Everybody thought it was the engineering operating system. No, but it was a Greek goddess of the dawn. And so, we did that, and we spent a lot of money building this thing. And I had a senior faculty member, again, these guys that are in that room, they're going to decide your fate. He said to me, "Tom, you and Billy are spending a tremendous amount of money on this thing." And everybody had kind of an IBM PC in their office. He says, "And nobody's going to use this big, expensive workstation." And I'm kind of like, is this true? I mean, but these things actually, they're big, and they're 32 bits. This is when the PC was 16 bits, and they can run, CAD software. So you can design your chips and you can do all this really cool stuff with it. He says, nobody's going to actually use it. He said, well, maybe some of the students in the research lab will use it, but none of the faculty are going to use it. Mm-hmm. He said, it doesn't do anything that I can do with my PC.
Yeah.
Which I'm gonna get back to Marshall. Hold that thought. Okay.
Right.
And we got to do this. So anyway, we're building this thing, and we started rolling it out and all this stuff, and they were pretty complicated, and the documentation was pretty sparse. And I don't know, you probably remember, you would go into the lab, you put up this workstation, this big, beautiful screen, like this big, giant black and white screen.
It had a wolf on it. I remember it had a wolf.
And in the middle, it would pop up an X terminal. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you got all this real estate, all this capability, and you're typing on this tiny little terminal in the middle of the screen. Mm-hmm. And so, it's like, we got to do something. So, there were others. We started bringing in all the open source software and things that we could, plus buying the very expensive, CAD software that ran on the workstation stuff. But we needed some easy documentation for people to, students to be able to get up to speed quickly on this. And Billy called me up one day. He said, "Hey, Tom," he said, "there's this kid in computer science, and his name is Marshall, and he's really, really good at explaining things and writing up tutorials and stuff like that. So I'm going to send him to your office." And so this kid knocked on my door, and I said, "You must be Marshall." He said, "Come on in." So he sat down, and, I had my workstation there, and he started showing me some of his tutorials, and he had printouts and all this. I said, "This is really, really good." And I hired him on the spot. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Okay, you're hired. I need to get, all your details. I need to get your email address and all this." And he said, "Brain at EOS." And I said, "What?" And this is back in the days when, you came up with your own handle for your email address. I was TKM. It was usually, your initials.
Yeah.
And so I'm TKM. And I said, "That's an interesting handle." I said, "You're a really smart guy, but don't you think that's a little pretentious?" And he said, "No, that's my real name."
You didn't know his last name was
And
Brain.
I didn't know. And he said, "Look, here's my driver's license." I said, "Okay, I'm sorry."
Yeah.
But that's how I'm not.
When your last name is Brain, I imagine you have to, a certain standard you have to live up to.
Yeah, yeah. And so we hired Marshall, and he did a whole bunch of tutorials and documentation for us. And then, that was great. And I knew him from back then because I was his supervisor back then. Mm-hmm. And of course, then as things progressed, he graduated, he went away, he came back later, and he actually did this teaching newsletter. And this was several years later. I'm in the provost office, and mm-hmm. Provost said, "I've hired this student who's come back to school, who's a member of the Academy of Outstanding Teachers. And everybody's told me he's like the best teacher ever at NC State. And he's going to write this newsletter for us." And he said his name is Marshall Brain. I said, "Oh, that's great. I know Marshall. He's awesome." And so I probably should, I'm going to say it anyway. The first newsletter came out, and nobody had proofread it or anything. And it just came out. And the headlines were, "Large classes are worthless."
Yeah.
And, knowing Marshall, this was not, Marshall would always write the headlines as attention getters, controversial headlines quite often, provocative headlines.
It works.
And it works. And then you get into reading it, but that was his style. That was his, his thing, but they let him go. That was the first and last.
One newsletter in your
Yeah. But then, I followed Marshall.
Was that before How Stuff Works?
That was before How Stuff Works.
Yeah, okay.
And then, he started the company with
Kelly.
Mm-hmm. And I can't even remember the name of it. No, what's
Interface Technologies.
Interface Technologies. Yeah, exactly. And they were writing the books, the motif books and things like that. And I reconnected with Marshall then. And then it was after that he started just kind of doing How Stuff
Kelly
Works.
Kimball a student of yours?
Yeah, Kelly was a student on my, absolutely.
No, was he through the EEP? He predates EEP.
Kelly predated the EEP. Yeah. But he was one of the ones that kind of had the entrepreneurial mindset. Kelly and Shay Woodard, Shay and Kelly and Marshall, I think, were the original Interface Technologies. Yeah. And then, Marshall started doing How Stuff Works kind of as a hobby, and it kind of caught on and turned into this big thing. And he got really famous and all this. And so, progressing a few years, I got him. This was after I'd started the university-wide program. We had the speaker series, and I got him to come and do the speaker series. And of course, he did very entertaining.
I was there for that one. It was
yeah.
It's I have to work really hard at public speaking, and then you feel like you're okay, and then you see Marshall Brain, you're just like,
I know.
He's not even like the same league. Yeah,
he's just incredible.
Yeah.
And so then, I had, after I went into the provost office, I couldn't really do the EEP myself anymore. And so I hired Steve Walsh. Do you know Steve?
I know Steve.
Yeah, Steve's he's got a really interesting entrepreneurial story too. I mean,
All right, we'll put it on the list.
Hot Chips and Salsa, which became Bops, and raised $100 million. It's another part of the story that connected to the Silicon Valley trip and the garage. The garage was originally his idea. And so Steve was there for 10 years. And then when Steve left, I needed to bring in somebody else. And I had, Marshall at this point had not, he had stopped doing the TV series and all this stuff in it.
Yep. Because he's founded How Stuff Works, like in, actually I had this pulled up in 98.
Yeah.
He started it in 98 as a hobby, and then it grew up, and then he sold it to Discovery Channel, or right?
Discovery Networks. Yeah.
Discovery Network. And then they turned it into a little bit of a TV show, right?
Yeah. He had 2 TV shows, I think.
Yeah. That was a $250 million exit. Wow.
Yeah.
And that was actually disclosed.
Yeah.
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 Not bad for a NC State kid.
I know. And I thought, there's no way I could get Marshall interested in coming back, but I said, I'll reach out to him anyway. And he said, yeah, I'd like to apply. And so, we do this whole process, this whole buy the book, HR book process. Of, the application and all this stuff. And so Marshall applied and brought him in for the interview, and he dressed up in a suit. And he looked so incredibly uncomfortable in a suit.
Which you've ever, a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, don't love to wear suits. But
I know
Marshall in a suit's like a very,
That's one of the big things. I've hardly worn a suit since I retired,
nice.
But it is nice. So Marshall wore a suit, and we had a talk, and is a good talk. And I said, Marshall, this is a real job. I said, and you'd be great at it. I mean, your qualifications and your ability to communicate and speak, and you've lived this whole entrepreneurial experience and stuff. And you're an engineer. I said, that's a perfect fit. I said, but you've done all this stuff. I said, why would you want this little job of directing the engineering entrepreneurs program at NC State? He said, my wife wants me out of the house. And so, no, that was kind of a joke, really, but I could tell he really did want to do it. And you think about it, Marshall's a teacher. He's a natural teacher.
Yeah. And I think he fundamentally understands the compounding we talked about earlier. Like, if he can impact, X number of people, then it's going to just pay dividends.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that was my philosophy as well. I mean, I can sit in a lab, I can do research, and I can do cool stuff like that, and I can mingle with a handful of graduate students, but I'd like to impact more students. And, again, back to my undergraduate experience at UNC, where, nobody really gave me the time of day. Now, I didn't know I could go out and find it.
Yeah.
But,
no one ever said, hey, come chat with me if you have a question.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes that's all it takes is for people to have permission to come say hello.
Marshall, he took the job and he put his heart and soul in it. Mm-hmm. And there are so many students. I mean, like Tyler Maloney. I mean, he said Marshall changed the whole course of my career. He was a Park Scholar and 4.0, all this stuff, materials scientist, and he could get any job that he wanted. And he decided to pursue this startup. And it was he took the class when Marshall was there, and I mean that just had a profound experience, and there've been many others who've had that profound experience. So and
the reason we're bringing it up is he recently passed, and you and I were at his funeral, and you gave some really nice remarks, kind of telling some of these stories, but that was remarkable to see how many across generations too. So you had 70 and 80-year-olds up to 20-year-olds that had been impacted by him.
Yeah. And
then also the number of people that got into STEM thanks to How Stuff Works.
Yes.
It kind of sparked this curiosity.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a funny thing, because when I first hired him and I started introducing him to students, and I'd say, this is Marshall Brain. He's the guy who started How Stuff Works, and their eyes would get really big. Mm-hmm. He started How Stuff Works, and it's like he's this cult hero. Yeah. The kids that went into STEM.
Yeah, I feel like we need another version of Marshall for this TikTok generation, because there's I feel like the younger folks are drifting away from it because they're getting their content in such little bite-sized chunks And Marshall was really good at that, but like, it still is what you and I today would call pretty long form. So anyway,
yeah. Marshall truly had a gift. He had a talent for explaining complicated topics so people could understand. And I haven't met many people that could actually do that.
But he was a little bit of a Tootsie Roll Pop, because inside was a rebel. Like the no large classes. If something rubbed him the wrong way, there was a unyielding force inside of there.
There was.
That was and it would push back pretty hard sometimes too.
Yeah, I was actually known by my staff as the Marshall Whisperer.
Yeah,
because when he would get excited about something like that at the university, I could go and talk him down a little bit, and it always worked. I mean, we had this great relationship, and it's very sad that he's gone. Very sad.
But look at the impact.
I mean, big impact. Legacy will live on.
Yeah. Great guy. Okay, let's talk about you becoming a founder. So back up now to when I first met Marshall and the EOS system, and we were doing all this stuff, and I had the conversation with the senior faculty member who said, "Tom, what you're doing is going to be a disaster, that nobody's going to actually use it." And I thought, gosh, maybe he's kind of right. But I thought, okay, well, could I do something? Could I do something with some software to make it so that faculty and others that would not ordinarily want to do this, that might go to their PC, would actually want to use their workstation instead of their PC? And so I was actually fascinated by spreadsheets. And, it was Lotus 1-2-3 was kind of the king at the time. Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to write a clone of Lotus 1-2-3 that ran on the Unix workstations. But I ended up doing more than a clone, because there are all these cool things that the workstation could do, like talk to other workstations over the network and talk to the Cray supercomputer at MCNC and things like that.
Because you probably couldn't even run a spreadsheet. If you could, it would be an emulator mode or something, like some kind of a cheesy, totally useless kind of thing.
Right. So I wrote,
not using the big screen. It was probably like you said, like in this tiny little window.
Yeah. And so I wrote an X Windows spreadsheet from scratch, from the ground up. And I implemented all of the Lotus 1-2-3 functions in it. And I made it so that it could run bigger things than Lotus 1-2-3. And I made it so that I could actually go out over the network and get data and send data and do @ functions like on the Cray computer out at MCNC. And that was kind of cool.
And you put a bunch of engineering thing in there. It could run a Fourier transform. It could do all.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
You might have used it.
Yeah. It wasn't like, this wasn't just like some column A to B. This thing was like, steroids on steroids.
You could do Fourier transforms. You could do, eigenvalues and eigenvectors and all this stuff that you couldn't do with Lotus, and you couldn't do with Excel, which was kind of a fledgling thing at the time that Microsoft had. And so this thing, I didn't really intend to be, to make it a product, but I was I had a big research project with GE Corporate, and it was DARPA sponsored concurrent engineering. And so I was at this meeting in Cincinnati, and these guys that I knew from GE, were up giving a presentation about, they were leading this concurrent engineering thing across this big DARPA project, lots of universities and DARPA, tons and tons of money in it. And they said, we have this idea for like gathering data from many different sources and being able to bring it together and analyze and all this stuff. And the paradigm that we have in mind is a spreadsheet. And said, but no existing spreadsheet can do what we need to do. So we need one that actually runs on 32-bit workstations and can work over a network and all this stuff. And I said, went to them afterwards and said, hey guys, they said, we've looked all over, there's no such thing. And I said, hey guys,
no guy.
I said, I got this thing that I wrote, just kind of for fun at NC State to try to, maybe people actually use these things to do their grades, their budgets for their research projects and their cool engineering stuff that they want to do eigenvalues and stuff for. And I said, well, let's see it. So I sent them the code. I sent them a copy of it. And they came back a month later and they said, we want this. I said, fine, take it. It's yours. And And they said, no. I said, we have a policy in GE that we can't deploy any software that's not a commercially supported product. And so the naive accidental entrepreneur said, okay, well, I'll make it a commercial product then. Mm-hmm. And so that was a crazy decision and one of the most profound decisions of my career.
It's still with you today.
Yeah, still with me today.
Yeah, this is founding companies. They stick with you longer than you think.
Yeah. And so
this was 93. No.
This decision to make this thing was 89.
89.
And I actually founded the company. Well, I actually launched the product in 1990. And I knew I couldn't do it all myself. So, and I wouldn't quit my day job either.
Yeah.
Which might have been a mistake. Well, no, it was not in retrospect, because I wouldn't have had the impact that I had. But I could have had a whole different career. I could have been like you, Scott.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so yeah, I went and got two of the smartest people I knew to help me turn this thing into a product. Mm-hmm. And it was Billy Willis, who you know from before, and Dave Vannabout, who we also know. Mm-hmm. And so it was me and Billy and Dave that did this thing, and we built it into this thing. It went from like Purex Windows, which was lean and mean, to a Motif, which was the standard, back at the time.
Marshall wrote a book about Motif.
Marshall wrote the book about Motif. So we built this thing with Motif, and we needed someone to help sell it, the business part of it. None of us were quitting our day jobs. And so it was, we needed to partner with somebody who could help further develop and sell it and stuff. So there's a guy in Chapel named Arthur Costin, had a company called, Applied Information Systems, AIS. And so Billy knew Arthur. It's kind of a boutique software company that he had. And so we went and saw Arthur and showed him the spreadsheet. He got really excited about it. Because again, this was Unix workstation, an up and coming thing. And there was no such product out there like this. And so we partnered with Arthur and started this company. So we maintained two separate companies. XESS was X Engineering Software Systems. That was me and Billy and Dave. And then AIS was the company that was the public facing.
Got it. The sales, the distributor company.
Yeah. And so, actually, we had an incredible amount of momentum.
Was it hard getting the IP out of NC State, or
no? There was no NC State IP at that point in time.
So it just kind of.
Yeah. No, we told them, we disclosed it all. Yeah. It's like, but we did.
There wasn't a tech transfer.
No. There were no university resources, all this kind of stuff. It wasn't anything under a grant.
Okay.
They have tighter policies now, but it was pretty loosey-goosey back then. And so, we did this thing and it started selling. People were using it at a bunch of universities that had adopted this workstation thing from MIT. We got a lot of press out of that. And
did you open source it in any way, or like they would just kind of?
We did not, because working with AIS, we're doing kind of the traditional software, closed source. And I got asked to open source it later and didn't, because there was too many things tied up with contracts and stuff that we had back from the early days. I think open sourced it would have done really, really well.
Sure, Bob.
Over time.
Did you ever talk to Bob about it? But it's like,
that's a funny. This is the reason I met Bob.
Let's tell a Bob story. Yeah,
I'll tell. I got to finish this AIS story.
Right, we'll come back.
So this is like I learned so much about entrepreneurship that I had no idea. And this was 1990, and I'd been working with these guys like Bill and Chris and Brian Harry and others, for the years before that. It's like, my God, I had no idea. I thought you build this great technology and you just put it out there and people buy it. No, it doesn't work that way. There's got to be marketing, there's got to be sales, there's got to be all that stuff, and it's not that easy. And so, wild ride there. there were customers on Wall Street that were doing, big data analysis and stuff at the time using workstations, and they loved it. There was NASA, who bought it and ended up on the space shuttle and International Space Station and all kinds of cool stuff like that. The coolest thing, though, was Billy and I were on a plane, NC State business going somewhere, and we're on the plane and heard this lady in the seat in front of us. She's talking to her colleague that was there. She says, I finally found this piece of software I've been looking for a long time. And she opened up this magazine and there was an ad for Excel. She says, it's called Zest. And we just looked at each other and never said a word to her, but that was
I know you've
cool.
made it when you hear people.
That was kind of cool. So
the biggest manufacturer of workstations at this point was Sun Microsystems.
Well,
they had a group here, like Sun acquired a company here, right?
Sun, but before that it was Digital. Digital was number one, and they kind of crescendoed and burned, and HP bought them, and then Sun was the next, and we covered all the workstations, the IBM AIX and the HP UX and the. We actually did the VAX VMS as well, and so we had. I've still got the software that has 55 make files in it. There's a hierarchy of make files, but every architecture under the sun. So that wound down in 1995 when Windows 95 came out and Excel 95, and all of a sudden, Windows was 32 bits, and all of the Unix companies that were doing these workstations, they never got together. They were all competing with each other, and Unix became kind of non-standard on each of the different platforms. And so Microsoft ate their lunch with Windows 95. And so the advantage that we had of being a 32-bit spreadsheet, when Excel 95 came out, it just kind of went away.
Yeah.
And so we wound the company down. I hung on to the IP for the spreadsheet, and I'll stop that for now. But we actually started a company called Gray Trout Software, and I ended up being the only one left in that. But Bob Young called me up one day, out of the blue.
This is the founder of Red Hat.
The founder of Red Hat, and he said. I want to sell your spreadsheet. He said, I've got a company called the ACC Bookstore, and we're selling Linux CDs and things like that. So there's not much software to run on them. But you've got the spreadsheet that runs on Linux. And we, I ported it to Linux and all this, and said, sure. So, I cranked out a bunch of CDs and put labels on them and sent them to Bob. And
was he here in Canada?
No, he was in, I think it's Connecticut that he was in.
Oh,
maybe.
Okay. I don't know the precursor story to Red Hat.
Yeah. So this is the true story. I mean, and so Bob and I kind of became friends on the phone. We'd never met. He'd call me up, and if he needed more CDs or whatever, and he's selling a few copies of this. There's another company out in Utah called Caldera. I don't know if you remember those guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they had a huge amount of funding, and they were selling the spreadsheet as well. They were funded by Ray Norda. Mm-hmm. They were flush with cash. Bob Young had zero.
Yeah.
And so we kept having conversations about Linux and things that were going on. And we were having a conversation on the phone one day, and he said, Tom, I think Linux is going to be something big. And I said, I do too, Bob. I said, what can we do about it? He said, what? All these people that work on Linux, they're doing it. And this was really before the days of the web proper and all this. And they're all doing like FTP and email, right? To share the Linux code all around the world and stuff. And it's like, there's a fair amount of activity around the triangle area. He said, I think we should try to get all the people together that are working on Linux and have a Linux Expo. And I think we should do it in Raleigh. And I said, wow, that sounds like a cool idea. I said, I can help you do that. And so, you didn't have any money. And so Billy and I talked about it. And we went to the provost, and I think Billy was in the provost office at that point in time. And we got a little bit of money from the provost. We went to the School of Textiles and got the Convocation Center, which we could get for free. Mm-hmm. And that's where we held the world's very first Linux Expo. And I'm trying to remember what year. You might have to look it up. But anyhow, it was there on Centennial campus, and we had Bob asked if I could have a party, kind of reception the night before for all the people who are coming from out of town, the Caldera guys, and there are people from all over that came to this thing.
Wow.
And so we had this event at my house, and he
1995.
said, was it 1995?
Yeah. It's credited to Donnie Barnes was involved in it pretty heavily.
Yeah, Donnie was
where he
involved.
let Don too.
So Donnie was my student in the very first engineering entrepreneurs program.
Did you connect him to Bob?
Yes.
Oh my God, you should have gotten a piece of that. You should have a 10% of these all these connections.
Well, yeah. No,
I wish you had a time machine.
Well, Donnie's been a big donor to the EEP.
Yes, he has.
And I did get friends and family stock, for Red
nice.
Hat. So
Well, that's cool.
Kind of nice.
Yeah.
But so we had the party at my house the night before, and my wife got really mad at me because she asked what kind of beverages should we buy. And I said, these are all software developer type guys. And I said, they all either drink caffeinated soda or beer.
Yeah.
And
food choice, let's go with pizza.
And that's exactly it. So that's what we had.
This is what's nice about marketing to
the thing that she got really upset with me about, the guys came in from Utah.
Oh, yeah.
They were all Mormons. And
like soda or beer.
No caffeinated beverage, no beer.
Mm-hmm.
And so they drank tap water, and she was so mad at me about that. But anyway, Bob said he's going to help out with the expenses of the party, and he said I can kick in $500. And so years later, he sent me a check. Years later. And he said, he kept asking me if I got the check, and he told me, he confessed years later, he says, Tom, I didn't send you the money because I didn't have it.
$500.
No, that's funny, isn't it? I mean, to think about that now. But I'll never forget.
You should have had a nice little interest rate on that.
And I should have. But that party that night, Bob's been a big donor to the program as well. That party that we had that night, I'm talking to Bob in front of my kitchen sink, and I said, Bob, this thing's a success. I said, this is great.
Yeah.
I said, so what are you going to do from here? And he says, you know what? I'm going to move to Raleigh, and I'm going to team up with Mark Ewing, and we're going to see if we can turn the Red Hat distribution into a real company. And that's the true story of the origins of Red Hat.
Yeah. I always wondered how it ended up here. Ewing was here, right? Yeah.
He was in Durham.
So Donnie and Ewing were here. Yeah, okay. Got it.
Yeah. And the other guy.
But you kind of wonder if that wasn't here, would this have been the home of Red Hat? I don't know.
Not likely.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. I didn't know you played a role in that.
Yeah. That was, it's all serendipity, and it all worked out. It's great. I'm in, and, I was really involved. Bob as Red Hat grew, and like Matt Zulik would come in and all this stuff, he would always, the first person he would introduce them to was me. And so it was great because I got to know Matthew really well, and all this, just had a lot of interactions with the early days of Red Hat. And it was, the thing is, this is an interesting thing too, Scott, looking at Caldera and looking at Red Hat. I mean, all logic would say that Caldera should have been
more money.
Yeah.
More commercial, more
the success, but they weren't. And Red Hat was, and I can tell you why. And that was because they were really true to the fundamental concept of open source, and the community embraced that. And so, they kind of rallied around Red Hat, and Red Hat was.
Did Linus come?
Linus didn't come.
Yeah. Cause he's in Europe somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Sad. So I want to tie off a couple of things. So you've said a couple of times after 4 years, they decided to kick you out or not. And then after 6, they decided to give you tenure. And you had, in my mind, you've pretty much pissed off everyone in the dark room. So how did this play out for you?
A couple of things. One, I mean, I was doing some really different and innovative things, and there were enough people that thought that, this is probably a good thing for our department to, instead of just being the stodgy old, electrical engineering kind of department.
So the yaysayers beat the naysayers.
The yaysayers kind of did. And then the other thing, the EOS project, which it turned out to be a success. And it brought we got a bunch of students that came to NC State, and faculty that came to NC State because, we were kind of big in that community, and they talked about us at the MIT and the National Academy of Engineering and all these places that they talked about.
Yeah, it's like, who's doing innovative work around this? Well, you got MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and the NC State.
Yeah, and so there was a vice chancellor at Berkeley Berkeley was also building an environment like this, and I did a lot of stuff with him and got really close to him, and he actually wrote a recommendation, a 10-year recommendation for me. And to have a vice chancellor at Berkeley, you have to get external letters and stuff. Vice chancellor at Berkeley writing a strong letter of recommendation for 10-year had a big impact. I know it did. So I made it through that gauntlet.
Yeah. So you kind of hacked the system in that you leaned in so hard on the education part. It worked out for you. I'm sure you did research.
Yeah,
I know you did a bunch of research.
I did.
Too.
I have an okay publication record, kind of. It's not a stellar, research superstar kind of publication record, but decent enough.
Yeah.
But I never really liked that. I never liked writing papers.
Yeah.
I like doing the stuff, just not writing the papers.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And then I forget the year. I think it was 2014, 2015. We surprised you with the Miller Fellowship.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So that was cool. And that was a total surprise.
Yeah. You had a very shocked look on your face.
I was. And I wasn't even dressed for the occasion. It's right. It's like,
it was pretty sharp. I would have been in a hoodie or something.
Yeah. I might have had a tie on. I didn't have a jacket. But yeah, Alan Taylor, who, he's development in NC State. Yeah. I guess he had was behind this, and he kept it secret from me. That he was doing this, but apparently he knew that I had a bunch of students who had done well and that they would be supportive of this thing. The Miller Fellows, actually, I started in 2014.
Yeah.
I call it the Entrepreneurship Fellows, NC State Entrepreneurship Fellows, and it was Tyler Maloney and that whole crowd that did Undercover Colors.
Yep.
They were the very first ones, and they had come to me and said, we want to do this. Our parents want us to get jobs, but if we had some reason to stay and kind of work on this, we'd love to do that. And so I worked with my colleague in the provost office that was in charge of, the registrar's office and us. It's, can we do something to kind of make them like lifelong students so they can have access to the university resources? We had the garage at that point in time, the library, the garage, and all that. And so he helped figure out a way to do it. And I had some money that was scrounged away from gifts, like from people like you and others that had supported the program over the years. And I said, I can scrape together a little bit of money for rent and ramen noodles and give you guys like 6 months runway. And so we did that, and it worked out really well. And so I actually did it every year since then. And so it was 2014. So yeah, 2014 was the year
that's the year you started.
Yeah, I started it. But then when was the Miller Fellows?
Yeah, it was, I think Alan had gotten wind you were going to retire.
No, this was before I was going to retire.
Well, he was worried you were going to retire.
It might have been. Yeah.
Part of the pitch was eventually Tom's going to retire.
So Bill Nussey, he called up. He says, I'm going to be there. I'm on the Caldwell Fellows board. And he said, love to meet. Could we have coffee, maybe at the Starbucks over at the student union? I said, sure. It was a Friday afternoon. And I thought, you know what? This is great. And I was planning to head to the coast after that. And I almost called up Bill and says, you know what? Friday afternoon, I got to go. But I didn't. I said, because this is Bill and this is my student, and I think very highly of him. So I met him and for coffee and all this at the Starbucks. And he says, hey, come upstairs. He says, we got the Caldwell group up there. He says, some people I want to introduce you to. And I said, you know what? I'm really not dressed for that. I said, and so I went up to this room, and I looked in the room, and I saw my mom talking to the chancellor. I said, what the heck is going on here?
Mom?
My mom, she's not a Caldwell Fellow. And so, and then it was kind of like a surprise. And then they announced this Miller Fellows.
Okay, I think it was 2017.
Yeah, that
makes sense. Right. I know it was before the pandemic, but I don't know if you have this thing, like things get kind of fuzzy before the pandemic. There's like a before and after thing.
Yeah. I actually did plan to retire before the pandemic, but they asked me to stay and help get through that. So.
Yeah, see, I think they caught wind of it. Yeah. Yeah, and then so what we did is a bunch of the folks you impacted got together and created a carved off endowment. That's not the right words, but
well, there's
essentially funds this going.
There is an endowment specifically for that, and I think we have probably about 5 students a year, and Jen Capps, she runs that now, and she does the selection. When I was there, I'd be involved in the selection process, but she organizes all the mentoring and all the events and stuff like that. It's done really well, and it's university wide. It's not just engineering students, but we've had a number of people that have come through and done that program that have had much entrepreneurial success, and so I'm really so thank you.
Yeah,
you were one of the donors. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other things you want to kind of wrap up with? Like, what would you tell folks today that are out there? They're either in school or in their 20s thinking about doing entrepreneurship.
But thinking about doing entrepreneurship, I would say, number one, don't quit school. I mean, we've had some that have quit school and fortunately been successful. But I don't like it when they do, because if they're not successful, they don't have that degree to fall back on.
Yeah.
And, the chances are, in your first entrepreneurial venture, there's a lot of chance. I don't care how smart you are. There's a lot of chance involved in success there. You got to be at the right place at the right time and, with the right product. And I wanted to make school relevant. That's a big reason that I formally did the entrepreneurship program. But I would say don't quit school. And I would also say don't let anybody tell you can't do it. If this is something that you believe in and you're passionate about it, so you're going to work harder than you ever have worked in your life, but you're not going to care because you're going to love it. And, even if you're working, 20 hours a day, you're going to love it. So follow your passion, be smart, And another thing that I tell students too is when you start looking at building a team, think about all the skills and all the capabilities that are needed. And don't think that you have to have all those skills and abilities. Think about your strengths, what you're good at, and bring in people in your team that are not just like you, but have those complementary skills that you get along. You get along with them, but they have different skills than you. And you put together a team that all together, everybody has a major role and a major responsibility, and you all lean on each other. You need each other. You're not all clones of each other.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Awesome. That's a perfect place to end it, I think. So
awesome.
Thanks for coming in. Thanks for coming out of retirement and throwing on a collared shirt. And
really enjoyed it, Scott.
Appreciate the time. Thanks.
Brings back a lot of old memories.
Yes. You've got really good stories and you've got a very good memory. Yes. It's amazing you can remember all these facts and names and things.
It just comes back when I start talking about it.
Awesome. Thanks for coming in.
For more tweener content, check out the Triangle Tweener Time Substack at tweener.substack.com. For more tweener content, check out tweenertimes.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon on Triangle Tweener Talks.